All right, we're back. Welcome back to the Family Table Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Casto, and seated across from me is Caleb Halstead.
Hello, hello.
Caleb, how's it going?
Oh man, it's fantastic. You can't beat it with a stick, as they might say.
Can't beat it with a stick.
Hanging in like a hair in a biscuit.
You know, I am learning, Caleb, that the biggest rednecks on the planet are not from West Virginia.
No,
I've lived in Tennessee, South Carolina, and Georgia. And it is by far worse.
Don't say it.
In the South.
Don't say it.
It just is. It just is. You guys have the funniest sayings I've ever heard. Like, people are like, you're from West Virginia. You're a real country. And I'm like, well, first of all, I grew up in West Virginia.
Sure.
So, yes, there's a lot of country around me, but I actually grew up in Charleston, West Virginia area, which is a city.
Right.
An actual city with buildings,
metropolis,
running water, no outhouses. We had restaurants, things like that. And so I grew up in a town actually called Nitro.
Yes.
Which was named after nitroglycerin.
Blow them up.
So I had to be a person of faith all my life, because at any moment we could have blew up in the Chemical Valley. Our region was literally called the Chemical Valley. So life was interesting there. Yeah. And you didn't swim in the rivers.
That's the healthy glow that you have nowadays. You know,
I guess.
Radiates.
Yeah,
you know?
it's kind of carry radiation in my body, but
right.
You didn't swim in the rivers.
No.
Because then you could come out with extras.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
extra fingers on one hand.
Yeah. So we didn't do a lot of that. So I stayed out of the river as much as possible. But
there you go.
But yeah, nitroglycerin is where they made nitroglycerin for War of Wars. And what?
There it is. There it is. Now, is that where the blue skin people come from too?
No, that's Kentucky.
Oh,
Don't bring that stuff into West Virginia. See, this is what I'm saying. West Virginia gets a bad rap, and the blue people group, the first original blue man group that didn't need face paint to be blue, that's Kentucky, friends.
Yikes. Yeah.
So incest will do that to you. So
every time.
So anyways, but without going into that and getting prophetic about incestuous Christianity, let's move right along. Seriously, welcome back. And we're here in the studio, and we're finally finding our rhythm here in the studio. We're calling it Long Path Studio. We launched a business called Long Path Publishing, which is the for-profit arm for the Shepherd's Tent, which is our local family that we've planted here in Covington. And man, it's just been just a really cool journey of just hearing from the Lord, knowing that this is the next step that we need to take, and inviting people into a conversation. A lot of people love sermons, Caleb. They love messages, and all that's great. But I started the Family Table because when I lived in South Carolina, and the same is true here in Covington, services matter, encounters in corporate settings matter, preaching and getting equipped in corporate settings matter. But where you really drive it home is around the family table. It's around tables. It's around campfires. It's in places where you can ask questions. You can get into the meat of what's being spoken and what's being said. So the Family Table podcast really is inviting people into the conversational stewardship of the word of the Lord to our house.
Right.
And that's kind of the language I've gotten, conversational stewardship. We're stewarding the word of the Lord for the Shepherd's Tent, inviting people into what the Lord's saying here, because I truly believe this. We have been called to bring about a new expression of what it means to have a local family. And Apostle Damon Thompson sent us in 2018 and into 2019 to come to this city, raise up a revival house, a kingdom family here with a new set of blueprints. And so it's just been awesome, man, to be on this journey, and now to be able to invite people around the family table where they can hear the conversations that really shape the culture of our house. So it's one thing to hear us preach. It's one thing to watch a service. It's another thing to get involved in the conversations that we're actually having, which produce the kingdom life. And so I really want these podcasts to be full of that, full of like, what is God saying? How is that being fleshed out among that family? And so again, and even Larry Sparks, who is the senior editor of Destiny Image, I think that's his title. He's the big guy there, and who gave me the book contract, and then they invited me onto the Destiny Image Podcast Network. He said, Mark, as I look at what you are doing, as I read your book, as I watch the live stream and see what you guys are doing in Covington, I really feel like you're pioneering a new expression of the local church.
Absolutely.
Which I think is awesome. And so really thankful. And so we started this podcast for that purpose, to go, we're learning some things. We're seeing some new blueprints. We're coming into fresh revelation of the gospel. It's not new. It's just fresh to us. And so I want this podcast to be full of fresh revelation of the gospel. Also talking about the wineskin. That the family table is a place to really talk about the wineskin and the stewardship of the word of the Lord to us. And so anyways, thank you for watching. Thank you for jumping in here with us and joining us around the table here and in our new Long Path studios. And like I said, this for-profit arm was to launch media resources like this. So I've got books that I've wrote, Liar, Exposing Myths in Spiritual Warfare. I've got another book called The Shepherd's Tent, Learning to Rest in God Amid a Chaotic World. Also got a new book with Destiny Image called Carriers of His Presence. I think we're going to talk a little bit about some of this stuff today. But got some resources that are going to be made available on that. But I'm super excited because we're stepping into what we're going to do to serve the body of Christ through Long Path Publishing. And the first way we're going to do that is start Long Path Learning Community. There are so many people hungry for true discipleship. They're hungry for this teaching. They're hungry for a fresh understanding of the gospel, the wineskin of family, revival, devotion. They're hungry for these blueprints. And so we're launching officially Long Path Learning Community. And by the time that this podcast goes out, we're going to put the link in the description below. It will all be live. And so you'll have access to every e-course I've done, plus new teaching that we upload every single week. And this library is just going to continue to grow. So I want you that are watching this, if you want to go deeper into the teaching, you want to go deeper on this journey of discipleship, and you really want to learn kingdom living, we want to invite you to join Long Path Learning Community. It's a monthly subscription. You can pay for 1 year up front, or you can just sign up monthly. It's cheaper to do the yearly, but we want to invite as many people to jump on this journey. And we've got so many exciting things that we're going to be teaching from this, Caleb. We're going to not only teach on spiritual warfare, but victorious eschatology. I have an optimistic view of the end times, and most people do not. That I grew up with, they do not. All they know is pre-tribulation rapture theory, and they've not been exposed to other teachings of the gospel. And listen, I believe biblically that you have to really twist things to believe in a pre-tribulation rapture. I'm just saying that. But there are more views out there, and I have a very optimistic view. And I've sat under some of the greatest rapture teachers on the planet. But I really feel like Yahweh has given me a biblical worldview, a biblical eschatology, and it's victorious. It's full of victory. I believe Jesus meant what he said when we were to go out into all the world and make disciples. I believe the prophets when they said the knowledge of the glory of the Lord is going to cover the earth as the waters do cover the sea. I believe that. I also believe that until the kingdoms of this world become the kingdoms of our God and his Christ, like we're going to be here, and our assignment is to the earth, not to leave, not to flee because things are getting bad. I believe the church is supposed to be victorious. I believe the bride of Christ is to be victorious. And so, man, we're going to teach these things in Long Path Learning Community. So if you're watching this, get the link below, check out the information about the membership, and immediately, as soon as you sign up, you got hours of teaching to watch. Immediately. And I also, Caleb, just recently started teaching, and this is maybe an announcement for later to come, but there will eventually be an in-person option for people to be a part of Long Path Learning Community. But if you're not able to move here, you're not able to be here, we're going to upload those teachings into Long Path Learning Community. It's going to be awesome, man. So I'm super pumped about Long Path Publishing, period. And I'm super pumped to launch our first resource. And I hope you'll click the link today and join. It's going to be a blast. All right, Caleb, I'm ready to talk.
Okay.
I'm ready to talk about some stuff.
I'm glad.
Okay,
Let's
so
go.
Caleb, let me give you an honest thing that's happening here. These podcasts are not scripted.
No.
At all. Caleb, how much time did we spend in preparation for this topic?
Oh, probably a good 45, 50 seconds.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So you don't have any, like, you don't even know the title of this podcast right now, do you?
No, it's episode 18. That's all I know. It's episode 18. So there you go.
So this is introducing Caleb. This is just throwing Caleb out in the deep, because I feel like Caleb is more of a prepper than me. Are you?
I recorded a reel for Instagram yesterday, wrote out a script on my computer to make sure I could fit it within the time slot. Yep. Rehearsed it probably 10 times, got it down to within the allotted time, and then nailed it, knocked it out of the park. It was great. But I was reading the script off of my laptop.
Yeah. So there you go. Caleb's a good little Baptist Christian that has the Holy Ghost now. And I'm a good Pentecostal.
There you go.
People are like, Mark, what's your 5-year plan? I'm like, I don't have a 5-minute plan. Like, all I'm thinking about right now is when we get done with this podcast, where are we going to eat? I've got a noon phone call with a group of guys in the men's rite of passage group, which is part of Long Path Learning Community, by the way. But I don't think about a lot of that.
Right.
And I know this sounds like a cop-out. Because people are like, you need vision, you need goals, you need long-term plans. I didn't say that I don't have goals. I probably should write them down. I don't know. But I mean, I have things that are on the forefront of my mind that I believe the Lord put there. But like, I really do take it serious when it's like, Jesus, I believe, lived this way every day. He woke up and said, I'm only going to do what I see the Father doing. And then he tells Nicodemus, he was like, you need to learn, like, a man born of the Spirit, born of spirit wind, John 3, is a man who is friends with the wind. And he was like, and here's the thing about the wind. You don't know where it's coming from, and you don't know where it's going. And he says, such is a man born of the Spirit. And so it sounds like a cop-out when I say that, but I literally went to South Carolina, spent 4 years under Apostle Damon there in South Carolina. And that was one of the things that he drove home to us over and over again, is that you like, to truly be a kingdom man, you can't tell God what your life's going to look like. Mm-hmm. I was reading a passage the other day, and I'm sorry, I can't remember off the top of my head where it is. But I think this was Proverbs for sure. But it's like, man can make all the plans that he wants, but it's God that actually orders his steps. So it's like, you can create the 5-year plan. Yeah. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the wind is going to determine where you actually end up. Mm-hmm. So nothing wrong with planning. So for those of you that are watching me today and you're like, oh my God, this man doesn't plan anything. He doesn't have goals for anything. And well, first of all, this is not that kind of leadership podcast. Okay. So you're not going to come here and get work hacks and productivity hacks. You're coming here to learn the life of the kingdom and what it means to be a man led by the Spirit. And I'm learning and growing in that every single day of my life. So I'm not up here trying to act like I'm an expert. I'm growing with you, right? And we're learning this lifestyle. But so just wanted you all to know, like, this is not a scripted podcast. This is right off the cuff. This is fresh. Yeah. This is what's happening in our world. This is what's spinning in my brain, spinning in Caleb's brain. And sometimes, let's just be honest, initially, because Caleb is being a good son here and a faithful disciple. He's mostly having to react to what's swirling in my head. But
notes, man. Notes. That's why
Caleb takes notes. Caleb always has a good conversation, and I think next podcast is all his idea. Oh, so I'm going to be in the passenger seat going, I hope there's a handle that I can hold on to. Saying, oh my God. Yeah. But anyways, so what's been swirling in my heart, Caleb, is just thinking about all of the cultural issues that we're facing today. And the church at large has a million different ways they're reacting to current cultural situations. So you've got entire churches that are involved in justice. Sure. And they feel like that's their big call, is social justice. We want to right cultural wrongs. We want to get involved politically. We want to march. We want to protest. We want to get out there where the people are. And so there's like the social justice side of this thing, which the gospel is about justice. So I'm not opposed to that. I'm saying, but I'm just giving you a picture here. And then you've got the white Republican response to the kingdom. Oh yeah, I'm gonna say it because if you are, what I've learned since the pandemic is we are far more political. Let me just say it this way: we're far more Republican. White Christianity is far more Republican than we are Christian.
Yeah.
And so there's a political church response that's happening in this hour where we are literally tackling issues from a political standpoint with no heart of justice, no heart of empathy, no heart to understand somebody that's different from you. And so I'm kind of painting like two big spectrums here. You've got a left and right response to the gospel. And I'm here to tell you that if you add anything to Christian, you've lost Christianity.
Yeah,
if you're a Republican Christian, you've lost Christ. If you're a Democratic Christian, you've lost Christ. If you're a whatever the term is, conservative, progressive Christian, conservative Christian, whatever it is, you've lost Christ because his kingdom's not of this world. Okay? So there's a bunch of responses that are happening in the church today to cultural issues. And to be honest, in the West, like in the United States of America, we've got some pretty serious issues.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like I'm very optimistic about God's plan, very optimistic about his global agenda. Like I'm tapping into the heart of God that is delivering me from the negative aspects of Christian nationalism that makes us only a fan of America and Israel. God has a plan for every nation, tribe, and tongue. And if we don't have that vision, we're missing the kingdom. So he's got a plan for every tribe and tongue. So I'm just looking at things and people's responses and the church's response primarily to these cultural issues. And we've got real issues. We've got real problems. We've got it is what it is. We've got politicians who don't know what in the world they're doing running our country. I hate to say it, but we have a president that is not even able-bodied right now, running our country. We have so much dysfunction, mental health. I mean, like anybody could look at this day and go, we're living in the last days. I mean, that's what we always do when things go to pot. It's like rough. We go, this is it. This is the last. And it's like, well, we said that about World War II. We said that about World War I. We said that in the Civil War. We've said that all throughout history when things get tough. However, I want to say that there have been more scarier days that have existed since the first coming of Jesus. So I'm not trying to belittle what's happening right now, but I'm just saying, like, this is not the first generation to go through hard things. But what I will say, people say, Mark, do you believe we're living in the last days? I believe, Caleb, we're living in the last days of the America that we've known.
Yeah, I think that's a good way. I think that's a fair way to say that. Yeah.
So I think that we are in a place where we are coming into the last days of the West. And in this moment, regardless of how people are responding, whether you're on the side of justice or if you're on the side of, I'm a conservative Christian, I'm going to fight this thing with my values and, whatever. Okay. So whatever side of the aisle you're on this issue, the issues that are happening in our nation, Caleb, whether it's drugs, pornography, gangs, whatever the issue is, the number one cause of that is fatherlessness. Period. Period. The old quote from Apostle Paul years ago was, I could solve every problem in the world if I could put a legitimate father back in every home.
Present father.
And so you look at the statistics of the cultural issues that we're facing, and you look at the statistics of crime, runaways, suicides, murder, theft, whatever. The common denominator on all of it is fatherlessness. And what's crazy is now we're living in a generation of even Christians that they love Jesus, they love the idea of the gospel, but they have no clue how to actually walk it out.
Sure.
Why?
Lack of a
Fatherlessness.
father. Yeah.
And so anyways, so today, if you can't tell already by now, we are going to talk about fatherlessness.
Yeah. I'm picking up what you're putting down.
And we're going to talk about the need for fathers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And so this is a really important message to me. And I'll be very candid about how this happened. Sometimes I don't like to name names or how I got to some places. I don't ever want to offend somebody or endorse somebody that I don't necessarily agree with. But I'll tell you the story. So I grew up in a pastor's home. My dad was an amazing preacher, pastor, moved in power, miracles, sang Southern gospel music. That's what's wrong with most of my theology is I grew up listening to Southern gospel music.
You still waiting to fly away. That's it.
Where death is glorified and everybody gets saved and anything good happens is because mama prayed. And I'm like, where's the songs where dad did? That'd be nice. So anyways, I'm poking fun, but yeah, so grew up in a home like that. And grew up in a Pentecostal home, grew up in a lot of legalism, to be honest. And I don't think my parents meant that in a bad way. That was from a sincere, pure heart.
Absolutely.
They got the baptism of the Holy Ghost, and I think that's what they thought it meant to be holy and what it meant to be a Christian and, whatever. So I grew up in that. And so one of the first conferences that I ever went to was called the Back to the Bible Conference. It was in Charleston, West Virginia. It was actually hosted by T.D. Jakes, the bishop.
Oh, man, get ready.
And he had asked my dad to do one of the morning sessions, and he and my dad were friends back then, back in the good old West Virginia days in the early 90s. And so in that gathering, though, first time I ever heard the voice of Rod Parsley, and I got to be in the back when there was Pastor Parsley, there was Lester Summerall, there's T.D. Jakes, there were several ministers there. But that night, Rod Parsley shared about the power of being joined to a father. And it wasn't his message, but he was talking about paying the price to be joined to a father and his connection to Lester Summerall and what that meant to him.
Sure.
And even later on in life, I would read the book Adventures with Christ, where Rod Parsley talks about his relationship with Lester Summerall and what that looked like. But at 5 years old, that put a seed in my heart that said, God, if you're going to do something amazing in my life, you're going to have to connect me with a father.
Yeah.
You're going to have to do it.
Yeah.
And so my primary search outside of the gospel, when I first encountered the Lord at 18, like I encountered the Lord as a kid growing up in the church and Pentecostal church. I saw miracles. I saw that. But a real encounter that made me want to start walking with him was like 17, 18 years old. And immediately I knew there's two things I knew. I needed Jesus and I needed somebody to show me how to walk with him.
Yeah.
And I never questioned that. Like I had the seed in my heart since a little boy that if you're going to walk this thing out and you're going to do it well, you need a father in your life. And to give honor where honor is due, that came through Pastor Parsley sharing his story about his relationship to Lester Summerall, which then leads to Lester Summerall encountering Smith Wigglesworth and on and on, and Howard Carter. And there's other men involved in that story, which most people probably wouldn't even know who those people are. But that's where that seed started. And so when I got born again and actually started walking with the Lord, I knew I needed a dad. But here's the deal. The church was in a place where they were just discovering, at least in the circles I was running in.
Right.
Jump in anytime. But I'm sharing my story here.
Right.
They were just now in the Pentecostal Church of God circles that I was in at the time. They were just now discovering like apostles. And they didn't even believe in those. I don't even know if they recognize them now.
Sure.
But they were rediscovering the gift of apostles and prophets, which anybody that knows anything about apostles and prophets, that is a gift to the body, Ephesians 4, gift to the body. But that order, the order of apostles and the order of prophets is the order of fathers and sons.
Yeah.
So if you were going to be an apostle, you had to be a son to an apostle.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to be a prophet, you had to be a son to a prophet.
Mm-hmm.
And so there had to be a real father-son intentional relationship. See, a teacher can produce more teachers without a relationship, because all you need is to hear a good teaching.
Right.
And that'll inspire you to be a good teacher.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying sonship's not involved in that or can't be involved in that, but I'm saying you can do certain things just by way of watching. But I believe the gift of apostle and prophet requires sonship.
To walk with.
Yeah.
Walk
It requires it, because they're such unique gifts to the body.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, so in my circles, they were just discovering that. So I had a man come into my life by the name of Dr. T.L. Lowry, and I served that man for 4 years. I traveled all over the world with him, and the Lord granted me the first phase of fathering through that man. So I'm 19, traveling with a 78-year-old man.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's in a way different season of his life, but it was an incredible honor to serve him. That man was a man of real prayer.
Mm-hmm.
T.L. Lowry was a man who never spoke a negative word about anybody ever in his life.
You can't say that about many people.
No. So, but yet he was trapped in a denominational structure.
Sure.
You know, and so, you know, I think in one sense, he had the seeds of systemic exodus in him, because he never was a man to play by the rules.
Right. Right.
But at the same time, he still submitted to that system. So that meant that there was a measure of this we were never going to obtain, because he was still under the government of overseers and titles and positions of denomination. So if you're stuck in a denominational setting, I hate to say this, but it's really hard to step back into the apostolic blueprint when you're in a man-made structure.
Right. It is.
Just is. So I'm sorry if that offends anybody, but that's just the reality. And so God gave me a measure of fathering in that man. But it was amazing to travel with him. And then I after those 4 years, then God connected me with a man by the name of Perry Stone. We built a massive ministry together for 9 years, and Perry was great to us during that time, and saw God do some crazy stuff. But even that relationship, like Perry and I have an amazing relationship still to this day.
Mm-hmm.
But we had so much fun. But it was all ministry. A lot of it was, we had a lot of fun outside of the ministry, but it was all about the ministry.
Sure, of course.
And I think the Lord saw my heart as a little boy, and he said, no, you asked me for a father, and that's what I'm going to give you.
Yeah.
And all throughout my story, in my days with Dr. Lowry, in my days with Perry, and all those times, man, the Lord weaved one man into my life throughout all of those different time periods. Yep. Damon Thompson.
Yeah.
And man, when he would get around me and my wife, man, he would just prophesy to us, always had the word Lord. No one ever gave us if they did, they were inaccurate.
Sure.
We didn't get a lot of prophecies, but when we did, we were like, come on, man, did you even pray about that?
Right,
you know?
Right.
But anyways, so long story short, trying to get there, God finally had me walk away from all of that, and he gave me a father in Damon Thompson. He's my spiritual father. He's my apostle. And he was the first man to care about me more than my ministry.
Yeah.
It's the first man to ask me how I was doing. First man to ask me about my marriage. First man to ask me about my relationship with my children. First man that asked me who I was authentically. Yeah. Did I even know who I really am and what I'm really about? That was him. And to have somebody in your life like that, it's a game changer.
Yeah, it is.
Now, granted, I have the greatest spiritual father on the planet. I mean, he's one of the greatest preachers in the world.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, man. I mean, I put him up there with anybody. You name any preacher, he's one of the greatest communicators and revelatory communicators of the gospel, period. But at the same time, he's far more amazing as a husband, far more amazing as a father, and just a man of the kingdom, man of the spirit. And so I'm extremely blessed to have the relationship that I do have. And the only reason why I was able to leave the system behind is because he did.
Yeah.
And the only way I'm able to stand here today in a new set of blueprints is because I had a father get involved in my storyline. And so like my dysfunction was addiction to ministry, but the rest of the dysfunction in the planet is from fatherlessness, and it's even crept into the church. All the dysfunction that you see. I mean, I just recently watched the Hillsong documentary.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Heartbreaking, dude.
Yeah. Unreal.
Now, whether all of it was true or not, that's not for me only God knows.
Right.
What I'm saying to you is there's no doubt when you watch some of the issues going on there, it was a lack of fathering.
Yeah.
Most dysfunction in the church is today.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same in the church as it is the culture. If we're having issues, it's a lack of fatherlessness.
Yeah.
And that's where we're at today. And that's what I want to talk about today. You got anything to add? That's my story. Sticking to it.
Now that we're 30 minutes in.
Now we're 30 minutes in.
What we're going to talk about.
What are people need to hear it though.
Yeah.
People need to hear, like, this is not coming from somebody that just has an idea about fathers. God birthed that in my heart as a young man, and I made that a pursuit. And I faithfully served as a son to fathers in the kingdom because I knew that was the key. And that ended up landing me into an awesome place to give me a legitimate spiritual father like Damon, which has given me crazy permission to be authentic from my wife coming fully alive, my kids. And so, like, man, we are where we are today, coming out of extreme ministerial dysfunction because we had a father. That's where it is.
Yeah. No, I think because I could share my own story and honestly take up just as much time, if not longer. And maybe we'll save that for another episode just so that this one isn't an hour and a half long.
I don't care. It can be an hour and a half.
It could be. But I think even in my own, upbringing, obviously we've mentioned several times on the podcast that, I grew up in a Baptist church, grew up in a Southern Baptist church, which a lot of people don't really realize that, like, not all Baptists are the same. Baptist is sort of a large grouping, but there's subgroupings of that, denominations. And so the Southern Baptist denomination is the largest group of, organized, recognized Baptists. And it was a reference to the, southern portion of the United States, but I mean, it's a global thing now. I mean, there's SBC churches, as we call them, quite literally all over the world. And that's the world that I grew up in. And even within that subsect of denomination, there's still a wide variety, It's not quite as, we've talked about, like, Church of God or even Pentecostal, where it's like, all the ladies wear skirts and have their hair up in a bun and no makeup, and the guys wear overalls and have Amish beards, right? So that world of Baptists really doesn't exist within the Southern Baptist community. Yeah. It's kind of like an independent thing, an independent Baptist. And so just to kind of give you a little bit of context, that's what I grew up in, but still the rules were the most important thing. What you did, what you didn't do, and they make the jokes. I remember being a teenager, and this is in no way an endorsement of the cartoon show South Park, but back when I was a teenager, that was just about the worst thing on television that I could imagine. That was basically the enemy himself on broadcast television. But they had an episode that essentially made fun of Christians, and the little characters that they picked to be on the episode, their favorite word was no. It was about everything that they stood against, So the whole episode was just that. Yep. And so jumping into sort of that context of, this is what we're against, this is what we don't support, and this is why we're different because we don't do this, growing up in that world, everything is about the preaching. Everything is about the teaching, and then your attendance. I remember being at my grandparents, my mom's parents' church, who also, grew up in the SBC, were a part of that, and even still are to this day. And they had sort of a recognized Sunday, if you will, where they wanted to award one of the ladies in the church who had perfect attendance in Sunday school. No kidding. This was like 30 years straight. Wow. Hadn't missed a Sunday of Sunday school in 30 years. And my granddad later, when we got home that afternoon, he just kind of rolled his eyes and laughed. And he was like, yeah, sure, she hadn't missed anything. But whenever she was sick, they'd all go to her house just to keep her perfect attendance so that she could say that she had perfect attendance for Sunday school for 30 years.
Great.
Because that's what mattered to her. It was, I've done this, I've achieved that. And the whole church recognized it. And so growing up in that, mentors weren't really a thing, but you had a lot of teachers, you had a lot of preachers.
Oh, yeah.
And you had John Maxwell, in the 76 books that he's written about leadership. And
76?
I don't
like
know,
7,600?
Probably. But nonetheless, there wasn't really exemplified anywhere that I saw we're going to walk this together kind of deal. You would see that some in the traveling evangelistic circles, you know. So Caleb might travel with Mark for a few years as they sort of rode Mark's circuit, if you will, and went around to the churches that Mark preached at and would sort of learn the ropes, take the baton. But that was really it. That was always a temporary setting, you know?
Yeah.
And so coming into, you know, my adulthood and just kind of seeing the things that the Lord opened up in front of me, and really my, I guess sort of breaking out of a shell, even might say break out of a box, of traditional, you might say Baptist theology. I often call it just a fundamentalist theology of, you know, the miracles ceased when the apostles died. Right. The last of the apostles were the 12 disciples of Christ and Paul. You know, right. So when Paul finally was killed, that was it. There's no more apostles after that. Prophets aren't a thing any longer, you know, and it was very, you know, you've heard the term cessationist theology. That's what I grew up in, you know, and so the world of supernatural, that was of the occult, that was of the New Age, that was of the witchcraft world, you know, and so walking into my adulthood years, I started to realize, like, no, there's actually people who are getting healed.
Right.
You know, I started meeting people who had been prayed over and had received miraculous healing, physical healing in their body, you know. I start hanging around these people and I'm starting to go to these services and I'm watching people get healed in front of me, right. You know, where they can like stand up and dance and move around and bend over backwards in ways that they couldn't 20 minutes prior. And someone comes and lays hands on them and now they can do these things. And I'm like, this doesn't add up. And I had on my dad's side of the family, a couple of my great aunts and uncles introduced me to what is Darren's name that does the documentaries?
Darren Wilson.
Darren Wilson. Thank you. Yeah. Introduced me to a Darren Wilson documentary called Holy Ghost. And Todd White had a lot of screen time within that particular documentary. And after watching that, I mean, I didn't know what to think. You know, I was like, this is crazy. And that one started out, I believe you told me it was because I didn't know. I mean, I just told you my history. I believe you said, wasn't it the people in Lakeland, Florida, who started experiencing like gold teeth?
That was Toronto.
Toronto. Thank you. Not Florida, Toronto.
Yep.
So that's how that particular documentary started out, was interviewing the pastors and leaders from the Toronto revival, the Toronto outpouring, right? And all of the crazy stuff that came out of that. And then fast forward to Todd White. Jake Hamilton was in that episode, or that documentary rather. And I'm just like, I don't have a grid for this. You know, like, how do you interpret? How do you realize like, this is really going on? And it wasn't too much later after that, I met a guy. There was a guy named Phil that was a part of the Southern Baptist circles, but he was really more on the international circle, if you will. Had a large ministry going on actually down in Mexico. And he came to our church one time, sat down at a table with me, and told me this story about a father in China who, I won't tell the whole story, but essentially one of his young children was holding their infant child and dropped this child several stories from a balcony. It was a complete accident, of course. But as you can imagine, dropping an infant from a balcony, you know, the infant was killed obviously instantly. And you can just sort of, I won't say, but you can imagine what would happen, you know, when that would occur physically, that is. So the father, this Chinese pastor who had a home church meeting in his apartment, began to pray, and he went and he gathered his infant child, right? Brings the child's body back up into the apartment, lays it there on the couch, wraps it up in the blanket that it was in, and begins to pray, and says, "Lord, I can't. This is not okay that our child has died. You have to bring him back."
Come on.
And over the course of 3 days, watched that child's body come back together, color be restored. And then on the third day, the pastor came home and the children were playing with the infant baby. The infant had come back to life. So Phil's telling, and he's met this guy. He knows the father.
Right.
And I'm like, what? I mean, this rocked my world. I told everybody I knew that story for like 6 weeks, man. I was like, listen, you got to hear what happened in China a couple years back. And so just coming from that, I'm like, where is this headed? What does this mean for me? And honestly, it wasn't too much longer after that. You and Destiny had moved here to Covington. I had heard about you guys through some mutual friends. And then, you shared before on the podcast, how we met. And so I knew that what I had been studying about with the miraculous and with the fivefold ministry, because that's something not talked about in Southern Baptist worlds, is fivefold ministry, in apostles and prophets. And so I was like, maybe Mark will give me some insight. This was kind of funny, especially looking back. I wanted to meet with you while I was on staff at the Baptist church, at my dad's church that I was at. I wanted to meet with you and have you teach me in a meeting about fivefold ministry. And I wanted to convince you to come back to our church and teach our staff about fivefold ministry. But instead, you dropped some prophetic words on me and told me that I knew that it was time for me to leave that place. And I did. I knew it. We're sitting in a restaurant that's here still on the square in Covington called Your Pie Pizza. It's like if Pizza Hut did the Subway thing and you just sort of walk through the line and make your own pizza, right? So it's very casual, very informal, right? And lots of activity and commotion going on. And here we are sitting in the middle of the restaurant, and I'm just boo-hooing. I mean, I'm just crying. Yeah. Folks are walking by, like taking their trays to the trash can and staring at me and wondering if I'm okay. Like it was that kind of
what
scenario.
This guy do to him?
Dude, for real though. And so we're sitting there talking, and I knew, I was like, this is the path that I'm supposed to follow.
Yeah.
And if I could add one other thing, it would be several months after that, maybe 6 months later, because Courtney and I, my wife and I, were not married yet at the time. And so just sort of, I'm rough on timelines. I always suck on timelines. It's terrible. But nonetheless, about 6 months later or so, we were meeting in your house there at East Haven, and having regular gatherings there in the living room, dining room, kitchen room, And I don't remember what you had talked about. I don't remember what the altar call was for. But you gave an altar call right there in the living room. And so I knew I had to, this was something I was answering, So I come plop down on the floor right in front of your television, right? And take a look. And I realized, I was like, what Yahweh is calling me into is where I'm supposed to be. And so I'm sitting there on the floor. You come and you pray over me. I stand up and I give you a hug. And as I give you a hug, as I embrace you like this, the Lord spoke very clearly and said, you're going to walk with this guy for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And I knew then, I was like, all right,
here we go.
In, and I didn't really have language for it at the time. Now I know clearly I was being introduced and invited into the order of fathers and sons right then and there.
Yeah.
But what I knew and what I heard that day was the Lord said, you're going to walk with this guy for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And here we are. This has been 3 years at this point, and you and I are, I think, closer than we've ever been.
Oh yeah.
And dreaming about the future together. I'm just like, it's just more and more confirmation every month that what the Lord spoke to me that day was true and right.
Yeah.
And we're still on that path.
Yeah. And I think that again, that's the invitation that is being given all over the body of Christ. I think there's two invitations. I think there's we're all being invited into sonship. Mm-hmm. We all are. Most people that grew up even in the ministry, they've been in the ministry for years. They know what it is to preach. They don't know what it means to be a son.
Right.
They know what it is to be a pastor, their title, their position in the church, but they don't know what it really means to be a son. And so like what the Lord's doing right now is he's inviting people into sonship, mm-hmm. which requires you to change your theology.
Yeah, it does.
Because it requires you to see him primarily as Abba.
Yeah.
And then that causes you to see yourself as good mm-hmm. and beloved. Mm-hmm. You see him as good, you as beloved.
Yeah.
And then you go from that to sonship. And then God's inviting men and women who have had who have extraordinary ministries. Mm-hmm. And he's asking them, will you leave the road? Will you leave the circuit, if you will?
Yeah.
And will you sit still long enough to actually raise up some offspring?
Yeah.
When I was out traveling and burning up the roads for 10 years, man, traveling 42 weekends out of the year, 6 weeks out of the country, just blowing and going, there's no chance that I had any actual sons. Did I have people that appreciated my ministry?
Sure, of course.
Would people have considered me a mentor in those days? Of course, which is a business term, by the way.
Yeah. And you can do that long term. Oh, you can do the long distance is what I meant.
Yes. And so people could glean from my ministry, but I didn't have any sons. And I believe the Lord has taken men and he did that with my apostle. He took a man who, Apostle Damon, could do whatever he wanted.
Yeah.
Go any city he wanted, plant a ministry wherever he wanted, be a part of anything that he wanted. I mean, it's not my story to tell, but I mean, very major leaders in the body of Christ that offered him major salaries and contracts for him to come in and preach and share. And his choice was, I'm going into the wilderness until this wilderness turns into a promise.
Yeah, come on.
And I'm going to raise up sons. I'm tired of going and traveling place to place, starting fires, only for the leadership there not to steward those flames. That's what I experienced in all my years of traveling. And so the Lord showed me through Apostle Damon, no, I'm actually calling you off the road, giving you a new set of blueprints. And instead of you being prophetic evangelist, you're going to be a shepherd. You're going to be a father. And you're going to raise up a culture where sons and daughters can come into authenticity. And at the end of your life, you'll be able to give people more than stories and testimonies that people glean from your ministry. You'll actually have sons and generations that will follow after, that will steward revival and outpouring that won't last for 7 years. It'll last for generations until the knowledge of the glory of the Lord covers the earth as the waters cover the sea. That's what we're saying yes to. So I want to end with this last verse. First verse and last verse. It's 1 Corinthians 4, and Paul is saying to the church in Corinth, I'm not writing this to embarrass you or to shame you, but to correct you as the children I love. For although you could have countless babysitters in Christ telling you what you're doing wrong, listen, you don't have many fathers who correct you in love. But I'm a true father to you, for I became your father when I gave you the gospel and brought you into union with Jesus, the anointed one. And then he said, I encourage you, my children, to follow the example that I live before you. And then he says, I think this is interesting. I'm going to read this too. He said, that's why I've sent my dear son, Timothy, whom I love. He is faithful to the Lord Yahweh, and will remind you of how I conduct myself as one who lives in union with Jesus, the anointed one, and of the teachings that I bring to every church everywhere. And so this is the order of the early church was, if you're going to do something to impact culture, it's going to start when a father and son start walking together. And I'll end with this. I won't read the verse, but I'll quote the verse, because we started this podcast with the issues of the culture and how people are responding to those cultural issues. If Malachi says this, it says, before the coming of the great and terrible day of the Lord, I'm going to send you the spirit of Elijah, and he's going to turn the hearts of fathers to the children and the children back to the fathers. And he says, if this doesn't happen, I'm going to smite the earth with a curse. Now, for those of you that are students of the Old Testament, for you to understand what it means for people to come under the curse, a general perspective of the curse was simply God removing his hand, simply God taking his hand off of something and saying, okay, I'm taking my hand off and I'm going to give you what you want. I'm going to give you over to what you want, what you want to do. And so the issues today that we're facing, people say it's the judgment of God. I want to say to you, it's because God's letting us have what we want.
Wow.
It's God saying, okay, I'm here. I'm good. I'm giving you grace. I'm showing you mercy. I'm doing, but at the end of the day, you're going to get what you want. You're going to go after what you want. He put that in humanity. Like he gave us that authority as rulers of this planet. Like if you really want something, you can go get it. You can do it on your own, all by yourself. And so we have not embraced in the world and in the church, the order of God. And now there is such a desperate need for fathers, which is why, for those of you that are watching this podcast and you're not really familiar with this language, that's why there's such a need today. And that's why you're hearing the term spiritual father. The Lord said this to me. He said, why is there such a need for spiritual fathers? And he said, because Babylon successfully removed fathers out of homes through jobs, through work, through ambition. And He said this. He said, the reason why there's such a need for spiritual fathers is because fathers have forgotten how to be spiritual. So God is raising up, and I'm thankful to be a part of it. I heard that call to come out of systemic ministry, the machine of the business of ministry, get back to the apostolic blueprint where it's like, okay, if this thing's going to be large, I'm not going to fight it being large. If it's going to be large, it's going to be large. If God wants to send 1,000 people tomorrow, he can. I'm saying, though, I'm going to give myself, though, to sons. I'm going to give myself to actually discipling people, raising up people, doing life with people, being involved in their life, and being able to go beyond just scriptures and preaching in the pulpit and go, hey, I'll show you how to walk this out. Like, that's what we're called to do. And it really does make a difference. And maybe on another podcast, we can talk about this. Like, people have this idea of who a spiritual father is supposed to be, and they think it's somebody with a pulpit and a microphone. Listen, Paul said what made him a true father to these people is when he gave them the gospel and taught them how to come into union with Jesus. So if you have a man or you have a person in your life that can bring you the gospel and teach you how to live in union, there's your spiritual father. If that man says, I'll walk with you, I'll walk with you through the good, bad, and the ugly, because life throws curveballs. Like, I'll walk with you, and I'm going to keep you centered in Jesus, and I'm going to keep you centered in union. If you have somebody like that in your life, you need to be joined to that person. And I'll go a step further. And again, there's just so much, man. We're 50 minutes into the podcast, the longest podcast we've ever done. And I love it because I'm like, people need this conversation, and we probably need to do 5 or 700 more. But you need a father. And if you're going to do this well, you need a father. And if you're a pastor and you don't have an apostle and you don't have a spiritual father in your life, you need to quit the ministry. I'm serious because I'm tired. I'm tired of watching pastors fall. They're falling because they don't have fathers. They're falling because they don't have anybody that holds them accountable. They're falling because they have a gift and a title and a position, and they don't have character that can only come through submitting to a father. So I mean it when I say, like, if you're a pastor and you're not under the government of a spiritual father and you're not joined to an apostle, you need to shut that place down until you get one. And I would go get one. And you say, Mark, that's easy for you to say. Oh, friend, you don't know my story. I walked away from a ministry probably larger than most people watching this podcast. Like, you think it's difficult to walk away from a church where you only had like 100 people there? I'm talking about, I was a part of a very large ministry and walked away from my salary, walked away from my connections, and it was costly to do it. Now, I don't care about the cost now. What I got in exchange is far outweighs the cost. But originally, like, I'm walking away from my entire world to embrace who knows what. And most preachers and pastors won't even call me anymore because they're like, man, what happened to that guy? And I'm not popular anymore. And so, like, it was costly, but what I got in exchange was crazy. The fruit of my life, the fruit in my life, the fruit of my wife, my children, the relationship that we have, and how that overflows to our family here at the Shepherd Center. It only came because I got joined to a father, and I let a father get involved in my life. And I walked away from everything because I knew I needed a father. I didn't need a position to preach. I didn't need more influence. That influence was killing me without a father. And so I mean it when I say, like, it's not easy for me to say. I've already walked through it. It wasn't easy. I'm saying to you, it is difficult. It is hard. And there's a lot of processes that your heart has to go through when you walk away from thinking you're important to just being a son, a part of a local church somewhere. But I'm telling you, there are men listening to this podcast today, men and women, they're saying, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of religion. I'm tired of being fatherless. I'm tired of going through the motions. And I want the real thing. Well, guess what? If you want the real thing, you're going to have to get a dad. If you want the real thing, you're going to have to get a spiritual father. And guess what? Your spiritual father may not be 80 years old. You know, I've got spiritual sons that are 20 years older than me. But you know what? It doesn't have anything to do with age. It has everything to do with an assignment, an anointing, a calling, a gift, and honor.
Absolutely.
And so all I'm saying to you is, if there's anything you got out of the podcast today, you got a bunch of babysitters, a bunch of teachers, a bunch of podcasts and people you can listen to, but you're not living at the fullness of your potential in the kingdom unless you're joined to a spiritual father, period. And I'm hoping that we're the last generation where the people in the ministry have to be that.
Mhm.
I believe we're raising up here in Covington families where the fathers are going to be spiritual.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there won't be a need for spiritual fathers because
Right.
all of the fathers will be spiritual again.
Yep.
They'll
In
be
the
walking
house.
with God,
In the house.
discipling their own kids
Yep.
in their own union with Jesus. And we'll
Yep.
see. But there is a need.
Explosions will happen.
Yeah.
Explosions.
And so if you want to fix the cultural issues of the church, you want to fix the cultural issues happening in the world,
Mhm.
better get joined to a dad.
Yeah.
And here's why I say, because dads mature sons.
Yep.
And the whole earth is in earnest expectation,
Mhm.
waiting on the manifestation of the sons of God.
Yeah.
Well, sons have to be prepared by fathers.
Yep.
Period.
Every time.
So if you'll put me in the camera here, dramatic close.
That's right.
Just kidding. No, but seriously, you need a father.
Yeah.
Stop playing around. I don't care how big your ministry is. I don't care how many books you've written. I don't care how many people go to your church. If you don't have a spiritual father, you need one. And if you want to see the culture change, start by raising up sons and daughters in your own house.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm not talking about the church. I'm talking about in your own house. Find a father and then find people to father.
Yep. Yep. Yeah.
Be a son. The only way you can be a father is you got to first be a son. But there's such a lack of father sons that as soon as the son says yes to a father, God will turn him into a father immediately because he needs more of them.
Yeah.
So this is talking about the necessity of a father. It's biblical. It was the order of the apostles and the prophets all throughout Scripture. School of the prophets was based on fathers and sons. They were called sons of the prophets.
Shocker.
Wow.
Yeah. Who'da thunk?
And then you see all throughout Paul's writings when they're talking about the kingdom and government, my son,
yeah,
my daughter,
yeah,
my brother, my sister. It was a family model.
Every time.
So, guys, I know this is a long podcast, but it was a needed podcast and it flowed really well. So thank you for being a part of the conversation. If you want to go deeper in these things, make sure you sign up for Long Path Learning Community. We're continually putting teaching in there, and we're going to talk more about these things as we go further. So I appreciate you being a part of episode 18. We look forward to catching you on the next podcast. I want to take a moment and say thank you for listening to this episode from the Family Table. If this podcast was at all helpful to you, please tell your friends and family about it. Leave us a review on your podcast platform of choice. And I want to invite you to connect with me on Instagram at @MarkCasto_. Again, that's at MarkCasto_. And I look forward to connecting with you soon on the next episode of the Family Table podcast. May His peace rest upon you.